Hi everyone, it's Knight522 here. I hope you guys are all well. Welcome to the next defense in this series. Today we're talking about the Sicilian Najdorf variation and talk about the Sicilian in general as well. This defense is one of the most well respected in the world, just as little move a6. We will talk about it in a minute. But it's got very good results as well. White winning 37% of the time and black winning 33% of the time. So black has, win over 30% of the time, which indicates it's a very efficient defense, and also it indicates there's a low draw percentage. One of the reasons this is white will often castle over here on the queen side, and black over here on the king side. So both sides will attack. Black will try to attack over here to checkmate the king, and white will try to attack over here to checkmate the king on g8. Okay, so you may be wondering how we get to this position. I will go over it if you are not familiar with it. Okay, so white will start out with pawn to e4. Pawn to e4, the most common chess opening ever. Just pawn to e4, really. And you're going to go ahead with the Sicilian defense. The Najdorf is a variation of the Sicilian. And basically what this move c5 does is it stops white from playing d4, really trying to control the center. If white did play d4, you would just take, and then after queen takes, black would get a tempo with knight c6. We'll go over that in a different video. But from here, white is going to play his knight out to f3. You'll see this at least 90% of the time. Basically, the idea is white now wants to play d4 because his knight will be protecting it, and therefore he will not have to move his queen early on, which is actually a blunder in the opening, as it leads your queen out to attack. E.g., knight c6. Okay, so from here, you're just going to play your pawn up to d6, a very solid move, supporting your pawn on d5 and opening up some lines for your queen and your bishop. And from here, white's going to go ahead with the plan, pawn up to d4. So now, white's got this massive center control, and what you actually want to do from the black perspective is you just want to trade off this pawn off. So you notice after the knight recaptures, you've already traded your center pawn for a c pawn, and you have a nice center structure here. You're going to be attacking with your minor pieces, particularly your knights, quite a bit. As you'll see in the next bit, you're going to play a knight up to f6, just attacking the e4 pawn. And basically, if you notice, this e4 pawn, it no longer has the d pawn to defend it. So either white will play f3 in many of the variations, and will actually stop castling on the king side and castle on the queen side, or you'll play his knight up to c3, which is what you'll see in 78,000 games as opposed to the other 2,000 games, which is statistics I have on chess.com right now. Okay, so the Najdorf defense, as I talked about earlier, it was this little move pawn up to a6. And basically what this move does is, it does quite a bit. You may be thinking, really, is this one of the well-respected chess openings in the world? And yeah it is. Basically, if you look at this b5 square, let's just go back a move. If you look at this b5 square, look at all the different white minor pieces which are attacking it. You've got both of these knights and this bishop all bearing down on this b5 square, and there can be some nasty checks with bishop b5, and you have to defend with like your bishop and your knights, and it gets very passive. So that's basically the whole idea behind a6. Also, as white will typically castle over here on the queen side, as he's already moved his queen side knight out, and you have a secure pawn foundation over here. This also helps support the b5 move and fianchetting your bishop on the queen side, which you will see. Which is actually very useful in the opening. Okay, so basically there are a few different moves you'll see from white here. I'm going to go over the two main ones. There are so many variations in the Sicilian Najdorf. We're just going to go over the main two, just because I want to stick this to quite basic stuff. We're not going to go past move 10 at the moment. Okay, so the main variation which you will see nowadays, there was bishop g5, which was very popular, which is the other one we're going to go over. But for now, we're just going to go over bishop to e3. So bishop to e3 is, again, getting out the queenside bishop. So basically, white will be looking to castle on the queen side. This dark square bishop is also contributing to this diagonal and to this diagonal. So just supporting the knight out on d4, as that is a very useful outpost. There are a couple of different moves you can do in this position. One of them is knight up to c6. So then you try to trade this knight off. The other one is e6, just having a very solid pawn foundation. But I'm actually going to recommend a very good defense, which is a lot more aggressive, which is just playing a pawn up to e5 now. And this puts the question to the knight, and this knight actually has to waste the tempo. Just remember, this knight came from G1. It comes out to F3, it comes out to D4, and then it comes back to B3 as it's being attacked. And basically, because this knight's moved 3 times, it gives you a lot of advantages, and it gives you a lot of extra moves, just because white has kept moving his knight and has not been focusing on his other pieces. Okay, so from here there's a lot of stuff you want to do, but you just really want to centralize your bishops and your knights. Bishop E6 is a very good alternative. Basically, when you move the bishop out to B6, what's happening is you're clearing this knight and this bishop, so that your rook can come to this semi-open C file. The rook's always better on controlling open files. So basically, yes, this rook can come out to C8 and attack the king side, sorry, the queen side, where this black king, or sorry, this white king will be castled. Okay, so from here there are a couple of different things you will see. You might see queen to D2 right away. It doesn't really matter. But you'll notice that this knight is having to watch the E4 pawn all the time. So from here, you're probably just going to see the pawn up to F3. This is also a good indication which white is not going to castle on the king side, just because this diagonal is quite open for checking chances. Never move your bishop out of this diagonal. That's what's going to happen. From here, as you can see, this now indicates which side the king's going to castle on. I would just recommend thrusting your pawn up to b5 right away, and you'll notice if we just flip this over from the white perspective now, black is already going for an attack on this queen side, and it's really gonna destroy the white queen side where white will be castling. You notice also this bishop, which is bearing down on this knight on b3. If you ever wanted to trade it off and double the pawns on the queen side, that would be a decent idea, because then it would weaken the white queen side where this king is castled. And after you play your pawn up to d5, you've got this bishop pointing down there as well. So from here, the main move which you'll see from white again, he doesn't want to put this bishop out right away, as there's really no need. This bishop's not going to be doing much, can't come out to further than c4 anyway, which is another reason why this b5 move is very, very decent. You may see your queen come up to d2. This is actually the main move which you'll see, just clearing the file for the white king to get castled now on the queen side. And from here you just want to get your bishop out to e7, doing the same thing but castling on the queen side. And after both sides castle, this is one of the main structures which you'll see from the Sicilian. There's not that many different alternative moves, but it's a good example to show you. So from here, both sides are pretty strong. This bishop, you know, it can come to e2 and d3, but this b5 pawn is really hammering down the c4 square, which is a great idea. Also, if you wanted to get your knight to d7 and then to b6 and then down to the c4 square, that is very, 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 very useful. That really is. If you can get that knight down onto c4, if your opponent even lets you, that is great. That is awesome. Also, if your opponent wants to trade that off with the bishop, that is also good, because you'll have the bishop pair, and then you'll be able to open up the board, and you'll have an advantage in the middle game. So basically, that's the main variation which you'll see from a bishop to e3. There's not really much leverage. As I said, you can play other things from the black perspective. You can play other things. You can just play things such as e6, and then basically your opponent will continue with the plan. He might bring his pawn up to f3, and you can go for a more passive structure just like this. And then after both sides castle, you can just have a nice structure like this. But I think that this is a lot more passive than the other move. But bringing your pawn up to e5 really allows you to put your bishop onto e6 and really point it down at the queen side. But if your opponent ever does castle on the queen side, there's another alternative. Say for example, if your opponent castled on the other side of the board, you can then bring your pawn up to this b5 square, as we talked about before. But this diagonal is also very useful for the bishop. If your opponent doesn't play the pawn up to f3, I mean if he does, it closes down the file a bit. But bringing your bishop out when there's no pawn on f3 is very useful as well. So now I'm just going to talk about the other variation I mentioned a few minutes ago. There is the second variation, which I'm just going to go over quickly before I end the video. It's not something you'll see very much. It's more sort of aggressive than the other one, but it's quite easy to counteract it. As I said, I won't go into very deep analysis with it. And white's just going to bring the bishop out to g5 in this position. Now there are a couple of things you can do. In this position. Basically, the whole idea is instead of bringing the bishop to e3 and having a solid game, white wants to go and attack on the king side and remove this king side knight, so then he can then have more ideas of attacking on the king side. This king side will be a lot weaker without this knight on f6. So basically there are a couple of different things you can do. There is a variation with h6, which I don't recommend. Some people do like it. I've forgotten what it's called. But then this knight can be traded off. And it is actually, it's okay to do this, but you will have the bishop pair. The only thing is that you've got double up pawns, and you've also got an isolated d-pawn, and this bishop will really struggle to come out. I mean, it can come out to e7, but it's really blocked in by the pawns. This other bishop, though, is good, but the other disadvantage is you don't have your kingside knight. And as white will be casting over here, he can storm these pawns down and get attack on your king. So basically, that's one of the reasons why I don't like the h6 move very much. But the main move I recommend in this variation is just e6. So basically e6, and now if your opponent ever goes ahead and takes, you can just capture back with your queen, and you're going to have a very comfortable game. So for example, after this, the queen to d2, the bishop comes to e7, castles and castles. Again, it's a very comfortable game, just solidification, things like this. And then you can always go with your plan with the b5, b4 moves, and really attack the queen side where white is castled again. There is another thing you can do, which I should just mention. Just before I go, you can also bring your knight to d7. This is actually a nice move because this knight on f6 is often sometimes stronger than the knight on b8, just because it helps to defend the king side, and then you can really attack with your bishops on the queen side. But this basically, if your opponent ever trades it off, then that's what will happen. So usually after this, you'll usually see your opponent just come down to f4, and then you can always counterattack like this. Sorry, it's the same thing, b5, that's what I meant. It's the same thing really if you actually bring your pawn up to e6, just maybe f4. And then if you want, you can always attack this bishop and trade it off. Then your queen is also defending the e5 square, so for example like this. Or an alternative thing you can do after your opponent plays f4 is just bring the pawn up to b5 and really get a lead in attacking. Obviously after your opponent plays your pawn up to f4, it would have to be really, really risky to castle on the king side, and these pawns are no longer defending the king. Alright, so thank you very much for watching, everybody. I've been KnifeFighter22. This was the Sicilian Najdorf defense. It's a great defense, so please try it out. It's just a reminder, it's the initial move e4, and if you go for the Sicilian, and then your opponent goes for this variation with d4, which he will do about 90% of the time. Alright, so thank you very much for watching, everybody. I've been KnifeFighter22. I wish you good at playing chess, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.